Let's open with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this day. A couple days we remember a great moment, an amazing moment. So bless us as we do a little work with that moment in this class and continue to bless our celebration. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, quick one. We'll backtrack. If you're a guest of ours today or you haven't been to this class before or in a while, we are almost at the Augsburg Confession, which is 1530, but we're going to jump back for today to 1517, to the event that many people say got this whole thing started. Early on, as the church looked back at this event, or at the Reformation in general, they chose the posting of the 95 Theses. As the event that kind of started the Reformation. There are probably more important events, like the Augsburg Confession, the Diet of Augsburg, the Diet of Worms that we've looked at, where Diet of Worms, of course, where Luther made his stand. Here I stand. Diet of Augsburg is going to be incredibly important for the Lutheran movement in particular, not just the Protestant movement. We've looked at the Diet of Speyer, where the different leaders of the different areas, were told they have to follow the Catholic Church if they're a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and they protested that, and that's where the word Protestant comes from. So we've looked at that, but we're going to go back today to 1517 and just give you a few tidbits about the posting of the 95 Theses and what they're about and why it happened. So some of this will be a little bit of review when we went through it originally. Remember, I'm just curating information for you. So we're going to do a little special work here on the 95 Theses. I love some of these pictures that I saw in Wittenberg and the museums. Of course, you can find lots of these online. And so here you've got Luther with his hammer and pointing to the 95, really, theses is not something the way we talk today, but, so 95 issues or 95 points, in essence, is really what we're talking about. Most likely, when Luther put these up there was no one watching. He put them up and left, most likely, because this was a common practice in Luther's day. But I love some of these pictures. I especially love the sledgehammer in this one. I mean, we don't want any baby hammers. So this is a great early on picture that I came across. I think this is about 100 years after Luther. And notice, let's see if I can get my laser here. So notice that you've got a very well-endowed, a little heavy monk here, who's very fat and happy. That's typifying the church. And someone's kissing the monk's hand. And then look, who do you have down here? You have a poor, lame person and a widow and a little child with the little can out begging to remind the church about what they're to be about. And then who do you see running away here? Someone with a box with the money, getting the people's money. Here are the students of Wittenberg and Luther that are happy and joyfully, receiving what Luther's saying. And of course, there's a little kid helping him post them up there, and Luther's pointing to him. But here you've got someone trying to calm people down, and I think trying to say, don't be listening to all this stuff. And anyway, so it kind of tells the whole story. So this is the actual Wittenberg door of today. Obviously, in Luther's day, it wasn't made of bronze. And what we know of the Castle Church, there's two churches in Wittenberg, and the Castle Church that stands today that you see pictures of was completely destroyed in the wars following the Reformation. I mean, pretty much there isn't anything inside of it that's original to Luther's day. It was completely destroyed, knocked down, and then they rebuilt it, of course, pretty much as they could, like it was. And then I think this is from the bronze doors go back to the 1800s, I believe. And all 95 theses are there on the door. But it is definitely in the same area. Another picture of that. And that's the Castle Church, of course, and somebody else there in the picture. The actual door that we're talking about, where Luther put the 95 Theses, would have been here, right in that area. Of course, like I say, all of this is rebuilt then from Luther's time. You might be wondering, well, how do we know what it looks like? Well, in Prince Frederick, the elector who was protecting Luther, this was his town, Wittenberg, and that's where he founded the university that Luther's taught at. In Prince Frederick's archives, we found this picture of the actual castle church. And so you can see it's a little different than it was back then. So this would, I guess, be the actual door that, that it would have been, Luther would have put on the bulletin board, so to speak. And we'll talk some more about that. So let's look at the history, what was going on in Luther's day. Why did this happen? For Luther, who is a newly arrived teacher in Wittenberg, as well as being a priest in the Augustinian order of the Catholic Church. He's a monk. He's also now recently got his doctorate, and he's into the Scriptures. He's lectured extensively on the Psalms. He's been reading Romans. And he also, as you probably learned, had this horrible internal struggle of not measuring up before God. And in German they call it Affektung, this kind of depression, this kind of weight, this being oppressed and depressed. And it's like terror. It's like a terror inside. And so he really struggled with this. And so that's what's going on for Luther. But he's starting to get some grace. We're starting to see the gospel coming through. Luther later on will talk about a tower experience where he was up in the tower of the, I don't think it's the monastery, but it's a school. And he came across Romans 3 and he has this experience. But we only hear about that after the fact from Luther. Nonetheless, that's going on for him. But what else is going on? Well, the church has come up with a new indulgence. And so we need to remember, and I need to remind you what an indulgence was. And we need to try and get this right, because our blessed, wonderful Catholic brothers and sisters, they always hear Lutherans talking about indulgences, and we don't get it right usually. What do we say? We say, well, it's buying forgiveness. That's what it is. Well, that's kind of what Luther said it was, but that's actually not exactly what was going on. So, when you went for confession and absolution, there would be something called penance. You showed that you were truly sorry for your sin, and so that you needed to be sorry for your sin. You receive absolution, but then there's a penance or something that you do. But there was this also a sense in Luther's day that there's this thing called purgatory, and I believe Catholics still talk about purgatory. I don't know. Have to get a good Catholic priest in here to help us with that. But so purgatory was the place that you would go to deal with the punishments of your sin and to get more merit, so then you could enter heaven. It wasn't hell, but it wasn't heaven, and it wasn't really a pleasant place to be. So indulgences you could purchase as a sign of your repentance. It wasn't like, oh, here, give me some money and you got forgiveness, you're good. But as a sign of your repentance, you could buy this indulgence, and then you would have less time in purgatory. A development that was only for a short time, and I don't think this is still the case, but that you could actually then purchase one for a relative that's already in purgatory. So, then you can see how this is fraught, though, with danger. So politically what's going on is Pope Leo is building St. Peter's Cathedral and has created an indulgence to raise money for the building of the cathedral. Now this was not unusual. Indulgences oftentimes brought in money to build new churches. Sorry, this keeps checking out on us here. Brought in money for new churches and all kinds of great and important things. So now he's started this one for St. Peter's. I'm just going to kill this, so I'll talk loud. It keeps going. Oh, that's because the battery's dead.
What do you need?
It's all right. So we've got this indulgence that's planned. The Bishop of Mainz, who's up there near Luther, in the part of Germany that Luther's in, also, though, has kind of made a deal with Pope Leo to get another bishopric, I guess you could say, another area of oversight, becoming an archbishop. And this was not accepted in church teachings, but they overlooked that. For a huge sum, Albrecht of Mainz, paid, the Pope all this money, or promised him all this money, but he doesn't have the money. So the Pope includes him in the indulgence for St. Peter. So you've got it both to support building of St. Peter's Cathedral and to pay him back. So the Bishop of Mainz is involved in this. You got that? So that's what's going on. And the practice of indulgences is certainly something that we can see is fraught with the possibility of abuse. So Luther's teaching in Wittenberg, and this indulgence is going on. However, Luther and Wittenberg don't get to hear about this indulgence because Prince Frederick doesn't like the bishop and doesn't give Bishop of Mainz, he's from a different family, and he does not give, yeah, we can try it, yeah, sure, thank you, yeah, see if that'll help, does not give permission for this indulgence to be preached in this area. Also, this indulgence is suspect. And in fact, another bishop near Luther said, no way, I'm not going to have this indulgence preached because it's not right. Doesn't allow it. So this indulgence was suspect. And in fact, so suspect that the Franciscans, who usually do the administration of indulgences, said no. Isn't that interesting? So they go to the Dominicans. Thank you. Let's see if that'll do a little better. They go to the Dominicans, and the faithful choice is a guy named John Tetzel. And so Tetzel begins the administration of this indulgence, and we have little excerpts from his speech, which is really kind of, it's hard-hitting. Your poor relative is in, purgatory. You can get him out. Now, Luther says that there was this phrase. Now, we're not sure if this is just Luther or we have to take it by his word. Every time a coin in the coffer rings, soul in purgatory springs. Now, again, this could be debated. But this is being preached in a neighborhood near Wittenberg, not neighborhood like next door, but people would have to travel a day or so, and they were coming back to Wittenberg with their, not 95 Theses, but with their indulgence, which is a big piece of paper like this, beautiful, it's got the Pope's signature and the stamp and the seal, and this gets you less time in purgatory. Now, like I said, I've addressed that indulgences deal with purgatory. They don't necessarily buy you forgiveness. You're granted that. Now it actually helps you avoid the punishment for your sin. That's really what they do. Now, here's the interesting thing that I didn't know before I really started to dig down on this. There was indulgence fatigue. What do you mean, Pastor Bill? Well, there were other indulgences. This was not a new thing. There were other indulgences, and now here's one more. Now, why would that be a problem? Well, let's read from this great book called Brand Luther, talking about the Reformation. The problem was fairly clear with repeated campaigns over almost 30 years for both local and international causes. Most pious souls had by now purchased the precious certificates and were therefore reluctant to fork out again. This problem was recognized in the papal curia and brought forth an unpopular and highly controversial resolution. With the promulgation of each new indulgence, the previous grants were suspended, and the effectiveness of your piece of paper previously purchased was in abeyance. In the case of St. Peter's indulgence, this hiatus was set at 8 years. The one you had before doesn't count anymore. You have to get the new St. Peter one, which helps Albert of Mainz pay off his debt, and also Pope Leo, who's incredibly in debt, to pay Michelangelo to make those beautiful portraits in St. Peter's Cathedral, to the bankers. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So, this is Thesis 89, from Luther's 95 Theses. Since the Pope seeks the salvation of souls, rather than money, by his indulgences, and by the way, at this point, Luther means this. He believes that the Pope is surely for the good of the people. Why does he suspend the indulgences and pardons previously granted when they have equal efficacy? In other words, he's saying, hey, if one worked before, how come it doesn't work now? Etc. You probably didn't know that, did you? All right, so we've got indulgence fatigue. And like I said, the Dominicans take over because the Franciscans said no. So, this is a great little picture. I don't know if I should have, maybe I blow it up here. This is a Franciscan priest preaching the indulgences. Here's the people giving their money, picking up their indulgences, so we can see how they were done. You give the money, and then you get your piece of paper. Here's people looking on. This is the papal seal. And so we can see in this picture the work and practice of indulgences. So now, let's do a little more history in the time we have to say, many people today doubt whether the 95 Theses were actually ever nailed to the door. Why do historians have to do? They have to just take those precious things that we have and just ruin them. It's like you have nothing better to do than ruin my icons or whatever. But this is actually a fun and interesting question. There is no direct reference in Luther. He doesn't ever say, I went and did that. What he does say is that he sent them to his bishop, because he was a good Catholic. Hey, I've got these issues, and he sent them to his bishop. Did he ever post them on the Wittenberg door? Well, we know that people are talking about the posting, not just the 95 Theses, pretty early on. In fact, Philip Melanchthon actually mentions that Luther did this. I have trouble with believing that Melanchthon could get away with that if he didn't really do it. So we don't have any other eyewitness accounts. But remember, was Luther famous at this point? No. He's just a nobody. In a nowhere town. Wittenberg was a backwater nothing on the map of Europe at this time. Frederick's trying to do something about that, and he's trying to do this university and make a new place, which certainly is successful when Luther comes. But no one would have noticed. It was, we know this for sure, a practice that you would put things for debate and interest on the door, just like we do at college campuses today. There's places where everybody puts up their posters and their signs and all of that. And so we know that that was a practice. So how do you explain the rapid transmission of this document if it wasn't publicly put out there? What most people don't know is that Luther wrote 99 theses about scholastic theology and the problem of how Aristotle has corrupted theology. And he wrote that about 2 months before, back in September, or month before in September, and he had written that, and he sent it off to the professors of the various universities, and I think it was Leipzig in particular, but I don't remember exactly, and it goes nowhere. No one even notices. It's no big deal. It's like this academic debate. So somehow, these points that Luther writes get out to the people. Well, what we know is that there was a printing press in Wittenberg, and we know this too, which most people have no idea. That's so cool that I've learned this recently. The number one cash cow for the printers, I think I've mentioned this before, so some of you are shaking your head. The number one cash cow, their number one thing that makes them money. Sorry, cash cow, is that a bad thing? Anyway, I just remember my economics something. So the number one thing that made them money was indulgences. Literally, there were millions of these printed. We actually have the records from all the printing places all throughout, and there were millions of them printed. They made good money from indulgences. And here Luther comes along. But Luther, whether he knew it or not, he would become their cash cow. Because clearly, whether he put them on the door or not, a printer gets hold of them and they start to be printed. And then the others got printed. And in 2 weeks, they are all throughout the entire European continent. They're in Spain in 2 weeks. Wow. So, boom, the first viral thing. And so, I can't imagine that he didn't do that, because that would be the normal thing you do. They also got to people, and then when Luther hears that people are doing it, he's surprised. This is the other, all the evidence is circumstantial, but he's surprised. So in other words, he didn't go say, here printer, go print this and send this out to all the land. He's surprised. So yes, Carol.
I thought he heard somewhere along the description he actually wrote them in Latin, but they were subject for debate, so how did they get...
Yes, they get translated into German. Yep. Yes, they do. And that's a great question. Yes, I'm quite confident that they were printed in Latin first. Yes. Great. So, thank you for that. So I told you he sends him to his bishop. Melanchthon is the one that says he did it on October 31st. So it was the normal practice. Here's another really cool thing we've just learned, more circumstantial evidence. The copies of the 95 Theses that we have, and we have some dating back to 1517. In fact, let me see if I can put one up here. There's a copy of one of them. It's one page, and so it was a book type of thing. Those obviously wouldn't have been posted on the door of Wittenberg. But guess what we found? We didn't find one of the 95 Theses, but you know those 99 that Luther made to the scholastic things? We just found one just like, I think it was the last 20 years. And it's in a broadsheet, just like this, but much bigger. And it's the exact format that we believe was put on the Wittenberg door. We don't have that format, but we have the 99 Theses that he wrote a month before. So what that tells us is that the printer was already ready to do it in that form. So why wouldn't he? More circumstantial evidence. Anyway, just like you really care whether he did or didn't. But anyway, so there you go. So how can you explain it otherwise? I believe they were indeed posted, and there you go. So, this is a great little picture of Luther being the triumphant one, and then, people trying to hold up the Pope, because, he puts the Word of God and the Pope is falling over, or whatever. So, the triumphant Luther, I guess you could say. Let's see here. I don't know what happened to all my, I had a bunch of, maybe they're after this. Yes, let's look at a few of these, because you hear about it, you might as well read some. So, a couple of them, and then we'll finish up so you can get down to the party. So, number 90, to repress these very sharp arguments of the laity by force alone and not to resolve them by giving reasons is to expose the church and the Pope to ridicule of their enemies and to make Christians unhappy. This one I found to be prophetic. What would have happened if rather than just being repressed and shut down, it would have been dealt with? I don't know. It's interesting. So don't just by force, let's have the debate, I guess Luther would say. 86. Again, why does not the Pope, whose wealth is today greater than the wealth of the richest, Crassus, build this one Basilica of St. Peter with his own money rather than the money of poor believers? Number 50, Christians are to be taught that if the Pope knew the exactions of the indulgence preachers, he would rather that the Basilica of St. Peter were burned to ashes than built up with the skin, flesh, and bones of a sheep. That'll get him in trouble. So what is he saying, though? Pope Leo, I'm sure you don't know the abuses that your preachers are doing with these indulgences. 45, Christians are to be taught that he who sees a needy man and passes him by, yet gives his money for an indulgence, does not buy papal indulgences, but God's wrath. 46, Christians are to be taught that unless they have more than they need, they must reserve enough for their family needs, and by no means squander it on indulgences. Your kid's starving, what are you doing? Christians are to be taught that the buying of indulgences is a matter of free choice, not commanded. Christians are to be taught that the Pope, in granting indulgences, needs and thus desires their devout prayer more than their money. Notice he doesn't rule out the indulgences completely at this point. 94. Christians should be exhorted to be diligent in following Christ, their head, through penalties, death, and hell, and thus be confident of entering into heaven. What did I do? One more. There. But thus be confident of entering into heaven through many tribulations rather than through the false security of peace. So, these indulgences are a false security. So at this point, and this is a point you need to know, a lot of Lutheran theologians and historians, and I think they're right, and other, not just Lutheran, but all over, say Luther doesn't have this insight yet of God's grace alone, faithful in Christ alone. He's got an issue with the corruption. He's got an issue with what he sees happening. He doesn't think these indulgences are helpful nor biblical, but he doesn't quite got it yet. And I think that's probably true, but let's check out these ones. The indulgences, which the demagogues acclaim as the greatest graces, are actually understood to be such only insofar as they promote gain. They are nevertheless, in truth, the most insignificant graces when compared with the grace of God and the piety of the cross. So, there's some grace, rather than indulgences and works coming in. And number 62 through 66, I think, is the way we'll finish. The true treasure of the church is the most holy gospel of the glory and grace of God. But this treasure is naturally most odious, for it makes the first to be last. On the other hand, the treasure of indulgences is naturally most acceptable, for it makes the last to be first. What he's saying is that, of course, they work because there are works, and human beings want to earn it. We want it that way, So, therefore, the treasures of the gospel are nets with which one formerly fished for men of wealth. The treasures of indulgences are nets with which one now fishes for the wealth of men. See the difference there? It's the men, not the wealth. It's the person that God cares about. I'll go back here just to finish up. I didn't get these. Sorry. Thank you. I was going too fast. It didn't like it. I want to go back to this last picture that is in the wrong place. So, there we go. One more. One more. One more. in the Castle Church. Even though it was completely destroyed, Luther was buried there, and that was left alone. Emperor Charles, when he came in and took over Wittenberg shortly after Luther died, was told, dig up his grave and destroy his body. Destroy his bones, spread them out. He's a heretic, he's not a monk. And Emperor Charles said, nope, I only deal with people who are alive. And he left Luther's remains there. And so they are still there, and his legacy lives on. The fire that he started when he put those 95 Theses out for debate is still going, and I pray we'll be up for the task of keeping God's grace and mercy. And thankfully, we're doing lots of reuniting in the church. Still celebrating, working with our differences in these important theological issues, but we're also trying to come back together, and I think that's exciting too. All right, there you go. Let's go party. That Martin Luther and Katie are right down there, ready to have fun. They're down there ready to take a selfie with you, whatever. Let's do it. Let's go down and see what the kids are doing. There's coffee, more coffee there, more cake. Go celebrate.